So in this video, we're going over operating systems, and I'm going to touch on the big three operating systems everyone wants to know about, and that's Windows, Mac, and Linux. Because I talk about Linux a lot on this channel, but also I talk about Windows, and occasionally I'll mention Mac. And I wanted to break down what operating systems and the pros and cons of them for your computer that you can use. So it's kind of an interesting topic. And one, as I was talking to someone about Linux, they're like, well, I have a Mac or I have Windows. And most people don't really differentiate their computer from their operating system. And I wanted to touch on that in today's video. This video is brought to you by CDN77, the content delivery network used by space agencies and CentOS. I also am using this on Titus.com to speed up my website, so if you're interested in this, click the link in the description. So first up, with a bullet, Microsoft Windows. This one is by far the most well-known. It's the one I know the most about, and it is possibly the biggest operating system of all time, and it is, honestly. You go back 10 years, it had 97% of the operating system realm of things. I mean, Mac was just a little tiny portion of that. I think it's like 1.2 or 2%, something just ridiculously small. Everyone had Windows, and really up until 10 years ago, it was the only operating system, if we're being honest. Everyone used it, and pretty much everyone knows it today. So that is one of the big pros of Microsoft Windows. Is it's very recognizable, it's well known, and pretty much anybody can get around in it. In that same realm, it also has the highest compatibility. Whether it's hardware or software, pretty much everything works on Microsoft Windows. Heck, most things only work on Microsoft Windows, which is kind of a problem, but not in the problem that you're thinking of for other competitors. It's really a problem for Microsoft because it kind of pigeonholes them into this old archaic design around Microsoft Windows. So when we get into this, we kind of break into the con section. At its fundamentals, Microsoft Windows hasn't really changed much in the past 15, 20 years. This has made it more vulnerable. It's also made it a lot easier to just kind of attack and have the highest compatibility. So it kind of goes hand in hand, and they really have a hard time upgrading, because if they really ditch a lot of this old compatibility or legacy, it really would level the playing field with these other operating systems I'm about to talk about. And I just don't see Microsoft ever leveling the playing field. And that's not a knock against Microsoft. That's just smart business. I get it. They're a billion-dollar company for a reason. I just want to go ahead and throw that out there. It is using old code base. And with this, it gets exploited a bunch, but to counteract it, they do very aggressive updates. So a lot of their update cycles is almost daily updates, which is a little ridiculous. It's caused a ton of headlines and just problems in recent years. So this is a huge con to Microsoft, where 10 years ago, it was the only game in town. And, you know, when it comes to this, it's just not true anymore. Many other people are opting for other choices, as you saw its market share kind of decline in the 80s now. So it is losing steam, and rightfully so, because the quality control of their updates has just been atrocious. The second big thing here, or really the third, after you go over how vulnerable it is and how aggressive it is with its updates, is, well, it is extremely bloated. The bloat in Windows is real. I've had one of my biggest videos on this channel is how to debloat Windows 10, and that's because, well, it slows down your system considerably. When I run my debloat, I go ahead and strip out a lot of the services that are running that just simply don't need to be there. Well, it runs a lot faster. I usually can get about a 15 to 20% stock performance boost. Now, if it's an old PC that has been running Windows 10 since day one, I usually can get up into about 30, even sometimes up to 100% performance increase just from all the garbage that has been running on it or bloated it up over the years. So Microsoft Windows has a really big problem with bloat. But this leads us into Mac, probably the second most common operating system out there. Now, Mac, you say Mac and you immediately don't think operating system, but you think, well, it's an actual piece of hardware you go buy at the Apple store. And technically the operating system is OS X, which comes preloaded on every Mac computer. Now, this operating system has a huge advantage in that it's curated specifically for this hardware. So it's very clean, it's very efficient, and it just works, which is what Apple and Macs are all about. So I don't knock it for that. I think that's a huge pro and one that many people overlook. In the same vein, I think Macs are the easiest to learn. It's the one of the operating systems that I've had the least amount of time on, but was the fastest to master. I was able to really get in depth with a Mac, learn a ton about it in probably about a week or two. I felt like I had somewhat a good level of not mastery, but really high competence in Mac in a short period of time. And that's just because there's really not that much that goes in the operating system. And this is a good thing. It's very clean and it's very fast. And pretty much the ease of use is to the best level that possibly can. Anybody can pick up a Mac and pretty much figure it out. You just find Spotlight and then search for whatever you want to launch. And there you go. If it's not there, you hit the App Store, install it from there. It's pretty much that simple. But that kind of brings us to the cons of the Mac. The biggest con to the Mac I see, which I kind of touched on it as a positive here, but it's also a con, is its closed ecosystem, or walled garden as it's called, because Apple is constantly curating what goes into its App Store. Typically, it's a pretty limited selection, but it is high quality. And that is a bad thing, in my opinion, because you just don't have much versatility. Now, this is great for creative types, as Macs really have excelled with creatives over the past 20, 30 years. But for the rest of us, not so much. And in the same vein, with this closed ecosystem, Apple has always charged a premium. They're extremely expensive. The hardware itself is 2, 3, 4, 5 times the cost of a Windows PC. So it's a big investment, but one that some people can justify because of how well it works. But for myself, I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's just too expensive. The expensive portion of the Mac is an issue. And that's not only the hardware, but also the software. I talked about that walled garden. Well, they charge a premium on a lot of their software. And this is, to me, a big issue and when it comes to Windows or Linux, we just don't have the costs associated with the Macintosh ecosystem. And that brings us to our third and final desktop operating system we're talking about today, and obviously the one that I've talked the most about on this channel, and that's Linux Desktop. Now, I've been on Linux Desktop as my main daily driver for almost a full year now, and that's coming from Windows as my main daily driver. And what are the big pros to it? And right off the bat, the free ecosystem. The operating system itself is free, which is awesome. But almost every piece of software I use is also free. It allows me to do this whole YouTube channel. Pretty much everything that I've done software-wise has been free of charge. I haven't been able to do it with almost nothing, which is incredible. The biggest expense I've had for this YouTube channel is this camera I'm staring at. That is it. That's the biggest portion of it. And even before that, I used a webcam. So take that with what you will. The free ecosystem of Linux is extremely powerful. The second big thing about Linux that most people really love is its security and privacy. Where Mac and Windows really fall down in this realm, Linux is there to pick up the pieces when it comes to wanting a secure and private operating system. And as we start to value privacy and anonymity a lot more, you realize I can't use Windows or Mac. Well, Linux is there as that option. It's an extremely secure and private operating system, which makes it awesome. It also has a very bright future. I've already talked about that on this channel, so I'll link up on the card that video. But really, the too long didn't watch of it is I talk about gaming and how I think desktop gaming really is going to be Linux for its future, not just because of some wild fanboy theory. It's more of Google and Steam, Valve really putting their hats in the Linux ring and making gaming more valuable. And also, when I say more valuable, just performing better than Windows at its stock settings. You could take a Windows game and put it in Linux here in a couple years, and I think we're going to see better performance, as we've already seen a couple games start to perform better in Linux than Windows, which is a huge thing. Now, I'm leaving Mac out of this because nobody games on a Mac. I mean, there's a couple games, but if you're a gamer, you just don't use Mac for the most part. There's a couple exceptions here, but that's the exception, not the rule. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the cons of Linux. Now, the first one, the biggest one by far, is the learning curve. And the learning curve can be a little odd because it's a little bit different for everybody. For me, I've done this for about a full year now, and I got a really good grasp of Linux and really know how to build my own Linux box that just looks awesome. But in that same vein, it's a big learning curve. Now, to close this out, I wanted to do one last con, but at the same time, I don't know if I'd say this is a con to Linux, as it's just like the learning curve. It's kind of cool after you get through it. So with that, I wanted to put like a little montage together, and I wanted to tell you, this is Linux Desktop. This is what it looks like, except all of these things are Linux Desktop. And I'm going to just flash through all these desktops and just show you, where Windows looks like this and Mac OS looks like this. Linux looks like all these things. And yes, it does emulate Windows and Mac in some extent. You just got to know that you can make it what you want, but at the same time, I understand it's a lot of work for some folks. And at the end of the day, you just need to pick what's right for you. But with all that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. This is kind of a hard video for me to make because honestly, at its core, I love each one of these operating systems because I've used each one for at least a year, except for maybe Linux. That's the one that I've only on about 11 months now. This next month will be a full year. And it's one of those things where I have good memories of all of them, but I see just kind of, I just want to put out this video trying to be not as biased as I've been and just let people know that all of these operating systems are good. You just need to know the pros and cons of all of them because it'll help you make a decision. And really what I'm all about is giving you choice with your computing. I'm all about that. I don't want to tell you what to do. I want to tell you the options that you have so you can make the best choice possible. Or at the very least, open up your mind a little bit. But with all that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. And as always, thank you to all my patrons. Without you, I couldn't make videos like this one. And I'll see you in the next one.